So this is Ryan Festerling. I'm the President and Chief Operating Officer at QPS. First of all, I want to thank everyone for joining. We are practicing social distancing on this end, so typically where I'd have a few, 5 or 6 folks from our team to help me answer some questions. We are practicing what we preach, so I only have 1 or 2 few folks on the team here. So if I have to phone a friend, I'm going to do that. But once again, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day. And really, again, I think what we're going to be talking about today is how do we, as employers, navigate this, not just to make sure that we are just doing the right things, but also that we kind of are doing everything that we can for our employees, our customers, and the communities. So we'll get started. A few things on housekeeping. Everyone has their calls on mute, so we will also allow them questions in chat. If there are questions that come up, feel free to put those in now. We're going to try to reserve about 10 or 15 minutes at the end for questions. And again, just probably a reminder that the things that I'm going through are not at all legal advice. These are a lot of observations and things that we've learned. So on the right-hand side, I would love for any and all of you to send me a LinkedIn. As I joined the company about 9 or 10 months ago, I would love to get to know more of the customers as I make my way around. So going on to our next slide, why are we taking a leadership approach at QPS? Well, I think the first answer that I start with is I really believe that we have a duty within the community to do that. We serve about 1,800 customers every single day. We've got 7,000 people that rely on us to make sure that we are making the best decisions that take their health into account. And all those people are in some version of the folks that work for you. So we've got 54 offices across the greater Midwest, and we've got a lot of access to information. So I'm kind of a data geek, and I really enjoy making sure that I understand what are the moving parts that are happening. And, you know, you guys probably on the call, if you're customers of ours, know that if we weren't ahead of the curve, you know, I think our first communication went out the very first week of March, which it seems like an eternity from now. But we do feel like because we started seeing some things in our data that we wanted to get ahead of that with our customers. We also have a lot of access to experts, and you know that could be from kind of a quasi medical review board that we've used. We call some of our people that we know in the medical community that we test our thinking out. But again, we also have companies that we consult with, large and small. And so there are stories out there that I could tell you what the best in class is, as well as companies that, you know, we've worked with to maybe correct some things that probably weren't the best. But the last part is I firmly believe that if we get to do business with you, we have an obligation to help you through times like this. As a customer of ours, we owe you thought leadership and not just providing great people. Great people is only part of what we do. Just a 2-second background on myself and why this is such an important topic for me. As I mentioned, I joined QPS about 9 or 10 months ago. Prior to that, I spent 20 years working at Kohl's department stores at their corporate office in various leadership roles. The last 4 years was running human resources for Kohl's, which is about 130,000 employees nationwide. Kohl's still does, and at the time had an amazing response to all pandemics, disaster recovery. And so I was definitely on that leadership team that we would run through scenario planning several times a year for any type of scenario that could have arose to minimize business disruption. So it's not only something that I'm passionate about, but it's something that I think is really important as we navigate these choppy waters. So what are we going to try to accomplish today? We're definitely going to go through some tactics of things that work, but most importantly, I would really like to teach us how to think through these things. And so for me, I've put these into 4 different categories. The first of those is how do we focus on our communities and our role as employers. All the people that work for us in some function of the community. They have families, they have friends, and we have a duty as employers to do the best that we can for our communities. The second part is we all have customers. We have customers, many of them are on the phone, all of you have customers, and we have to figure out how we help them and not disrupt what's going on. There are things in the supply chain that can get out of whack. There are things that, from an employment standpoint, can get thrown out of whack. And our job is to make sure that we understand as many things as we can before it happens to us and after it happens to us, and our role is to do everything we can before and after that. The third part for me is, how do we come out as an employer of choice? I absolutely know that every single person on this call, unless you make Clorox wipes, wishes that, you know, this scenario would look a little different, right? This is very uncharted waters. But I have a firm belief that if we do things right, there are stories that will be told. There will be stories that are told at the dinner table, with friends, with families, and knowing that we are all going to do our best to get out of this at some point, how do we be remembered as an employer of choice? The fourth part is really sharing our learning. I would love to say there's a book that's written on this, and if anyone claims to have the book, it's probably rewritten the next day. So we have an obligation to share our learnings across the communities that we serve. The thing that's interesting, though, is you look at all four of these together, the first three have a tendency to fight each other. They really, if you're looking at them all in total and all equally, it's tough to be the employer of choice when you have to make challenging choices. It's tough to serve your communities when you know that you may have customers of yours that are canceling products. So how do we collectively do these first three together and share our learnings in the process? So I would be the first person to probably admit that, 2 months ago, you hear all this stuff of this is just a flu that's acting a little bit different. And, if you're being pessimistic, so to speak, you say, well, what is the big deal with this? Why are we so worried? This chart that is shown here, I think was taken out of the Washington Post. So everyone write that on your slides. I did not cite that properly. But it's really interesting when you talk about what flattening the curve means. The orange are the infected folks, the blue is not infected, and the pink is folks that are recovering. And so as you look at that, there's really one thing that everyone's worried about beyond, obviously, the health side, but it's really a capacity issue. And so there's lots of numbers being thrown out, but it really becomes a capacity issue of our healthcare system and the supplies around it. But, if any of you were on the call this morning with, there was lots of calls this morning. It happened. One I was on actually threw out some stats. But, in Wisconsin where I work, and, we do a lot of business here, there's a conservative number that says if 3 to 5% of Wisconsin contracts the disease, and by the way, it's hard to understand who and who doesn't have it because limited test kits. But if you just go with that assumption, that means about 300,000 people would contract the virus. And statistics are showing that they said about 20% of those require some type of hospitalization or extended stay. So that 20% then is about 60,000 people. Now, not everyone's going to have it at the same time, but if you play along in this example, it becomes a capacity issue. Because in Wisconsin, there are about 12,000 beds in all of the hospitals across the United States. And on any given day or any given week, there's about 3,000 to 4,000 beds available. So 60,000 versus 3,000 to 4,000 becomes a very challenging number. And there's also some challenging stats when you look out here of how many tests are available and the amount of folks that probably have contracted it versus the folks that are reported. So the big deal is we definitely know that if we don't do this right and start taking extreme measures, which lots of government agencies are doing, and we're as employers are asking ourselves to do. So I've thought about this in two different scenarios. And the first of those is thinking about countries like Italy and China, and I just read some horrible stat that I think Iran is actually releasing prisoners now to help combat the virus. Those are not scenarios we want to deal with, and I'm not sure about you, but when you look at pictures from Italy, it's very eerie, and that is an extreme example, and that is something that could happen. And so there are a lot of experts that are saying we are in wave 3, so to speak, with wave 1 being where it started, wave 2 being Europe, and, we are several weeks behind. This is an interesting thing to say, but it's the second part. What I'll say is we're all, we live in America, and if this thing goes really, really well for us, I think in 4 or 5 weeks, we're all going to be really angry that we had 4 or 5 weeks of our life disrupted because it was no big deal. That is actually, I think, what we're all hoping for. But the worst case scenario, I think, is what's happened in some other countries and what's happening in Europe. So I am hoping and praying for the latter, which is for us to be Americans and to be really frustrated in 4 or 5 weeks because we overreacted. And overreaction will probably create the best scenario for us. And again, something goofy to say, but I'm actually hoping for that. So that is kind of the big deal of what's going on. And again, all you have to do is talk to someone that has studied what's going on in other countries. And that's not where we want to be. So what are we doing here at QPS? So we're going to go through some of the absolute steps, so to speak. And towards the end, we're actually going to go through a kind of a list of things that everyone on this call is going to be sent as far as sample documents that we've sent out to our own internal people. But the first thing is about containment where possible. So there's a lot of easy things that we can all do. You've read about them in the news. It used to be groups of 300, then it's 100, now it's 25, and now it's really small, I think less than 10. But any time where there is critical mass, we should be challenging ourselves to make sure that we create a scenario where there isn't. So containment wherever possible. But I believe that folks on this call are in the same boat that we're in, which is we are in business. And we are making sure that we can do everything that we can to service our customers while making sure that we serve our communities and the employees that we have, and making sure that we balance those 3 things that we talked about and making sure that we tell great stories to our employees of what we are doing to protect them. But this third point on moving from reaction to action, I think is really important. And the reason I think that's important is because we have to make sure that through this scenario, perfection is not what we're after. We are looking at the scenario as it presents itself today, and what can we do immediately to make sure that we rectify the situation. And I think this goes from everything that starts with small scenarios of we just got a random phone call about someone's family member that may or may not have contracted the disease, to something major that I'm sure you guys have all dealt with or are thinking about in your world, but move from reacting to acting. And I put in these kind of 3 decides of discover, decide, design, and deliver. I would challenge you as you're looking at scenarios to make sure that you actually think about what is the issue, that's the discover, decide what we're going to do about it, designing, meaning the communication part, how are we actually going to do something that makes sense, and how do you deliver it. But the goal is how do you actually replicate that thinking each and every single day. So again, on the tactical side, so to speak, of what QPS is doing, and it's probably the next slide of what can you offer your employees. Some of these are really hard because I know most of our customers produce things that has probably a 90% capacity that are people dependent. But as much as you can on the non-essential, working remotely, flexible scheduling, we've seen this from some of our customers as well. They've actually just gotten really creative on what their shifts look like. And the thinking there is, I'd rather have 75% of my shifts operating and be really flexible than 50% of my shifts blown up because we can't even run the shift because they're not able to come to work. It's really simple things, but lunch and break times, we should be staggering these. Again, any time that you have people that are in critical mass, and critical mass is probably anything more than 5 or 10, you want to avoid that at absolutely all cost. I say be conscious of childcare and manage appropriately. We've heard of some scenarios, some companies that have, brought in their kids, so to speak, and said, we're just going to show some movies during the day. I'm not necessarily saying go do that. But being conscious of childcare is listening to what's going on with our employees. As you know, and you are all going through the same thing, the things that we're going through right now are unprecedented, uncharted waters. And being conscious of what's going on and just listening. There may be a solution that you can provide, maybe you can't, but everyone is going through some really challenging times right now. And I put communicate because I don't think in this scenario you can over-communicate at all. And I think even communicating that there is nothing to communicate is okay as well. So as an example, we made sure that we're actually having kind of stand-up meetings, so to speak, remotely now, but every single day at 4 p.m., just reporting in what's going on with our customers, what's going on with our internal employees, and what's going on with our AEs, the folks that are working for you, and trying to make sure that we react by the hour if necessary. And this last part, I just show compassion and authenticity. I'm not sure if there's a stat out there and how to even measure this, but to say that people are scared and uneasy is probably an understatement. We were talking about this a little bit earlier today, but I think, when you read about in the news folks that work in office buildings and Googles and Amazons and, wherever those are, there's a lot of folks that can work from home, and they are definitely doing whatever they can. The folks that we're working with and that we service, I firmly believe that they're nervous. They know that things are uneasy, and if things are uneasy and things get cut, they're probably the first to go. So showing compassion, authenticity in how we communicate, I think is really, really important. One interesting thing that we've actually seen through this is that, again, I don't have necessarily a stat to tell you, and if it was, it's not one that's like this impressive number, but this week alone, we're, 14, 15 hours into the week, our retention has gone up. The number of people that are showing up versus, abandoning, so to speak, has gone up. And I'd probably attribute that to two things. I think the first part is we've gone over and above to communicate with our folks more than we ever have. But I think the second part is I'm giving a lot of credit to the folks that we do business with, that they are communicating as well. And it's making sure that they, it's giving them an opportunity to step up and be responsible. So, I think there's some really exciting things that we can do to be the employer of choice as we come out of this. But again, communicate as much and as often as you can. So on our internal plan, I think it starts with the sources that we mentioned below, and there are so many sources out there right now. And I don't think any of them are necessarily wrong, but I think tailoring them to what you do is probably important. I'm going to go through a few of those things that we are doing on our side. I think I talked about internally what we're doing, but maybe just as a few examples. We're obviously maintaining as much as we can in the social distancing. I mean, the people that are in the office, we're maybe not joking about it, but we are making sure we stay away from each other as much as possible. Some people are taking that a little too far, and they're liking it, not having to talk to me, but that's all right. We've also done staggered teams for our leadership. So half of our leadership team is working remotely while the other half is here, kind of manning the force. And we're going to evaluate that probably the next 2 to 3 weeks and either flip or continue. But making sure that we have a staggered leadership team is really, really important. There are employees that obviously aren't able to work because of childcare issues, or they're going to be working alternatives. So we're following our own practice of being as flexible as we can. When it gets into the kind of the nitty-gritty of what happens if an internal employee or an AE or a temporary employee reports, we are closing the branch temporarily, sending them home, and making sure that the building is completely disinfected before anyone returning. I will tell you, just in the spirit of transparency, just like I'm sure you guys are all dealing with, we've had several calls where people have suspected something's going on. We get the test back, and thankfully, and knock on wood, there haven't been any. But let's be candid, it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time before it's your building and our building that's going to happen. But we're following everything we can from, World Health Organization, CDC, to follow that. So we are doing anything and everything that we can to make sure that we follow that practice. Again, virtual meetings as often as we can. In fact, we just looked at the entire interview process, so to speak, of what we do as placements, and we're trying to take as much of that as we can off person to person, and also working directly with our customers on some of their unique needs that they are asking us to do, and there's a lot of different ones out there. So for us, again, non-essential travel has obviously been restricted, and we're going to get into some of the other parts of what we're doing from a design standpoint in a little bit. But again, I think using the sources that are out there, there's a lot of them. So on the next page is a slide, and as a reminder, we're going to send a bunch of these slides to you. But this I thought was a really great slide because, and this came directly from the CDC, and a flow chart, so to speak, of what would happen should different scenarios present themselves. And so this is something that I'm very used to in scenario planning. But as you look through the details of this, I would ask all of you to think about the situations that you find yourself in, and also the situations that you may find yourself in the days and weeks to come. So as an example, we did this last week where, knowing that it felt like all this was coming, we actually ran through a whole bunch of scenarios on our end. And this goes to my discussion of taking action instead of being reactive. There is no reason why you can't run scenarios through your head, such as someone shows up as one of your own employees that presents. What do you do? Who do you call? What are your practices? Who do you communicate to the building? Who do you not communicate with the building? Obviously, it's a really bad idea to, if someone were to say that they presented, to send an email to the whole company of what the person's name was, right? That's probably a good idea. But those are real life scenarios that I think people are going to try to do the right thing, and really walking through what could happen before it happens is really good discussion. I would also tell you that it led to some really great debate on our teams. And I would tell you that all of us learned and got better through that process. And if you can't tell from how I think through things, I just feel like every single scenario we have an opportunity to learn and not just solve the problem. So I would really encourage you to walk through all of the scenarios that you hope you don't have to do, and walk through them now. The reason I think that is so important is you're actually walking through scenarios without people's names. Anytime that you include a person's name, it could be your best employee, your favorite employee, it could be your boss, it could be your favorite lunch worker, whoever that is. Anytime that you actually attach a name to the scenario, it's going to cloud the issue. If you discuss a scenario, and these scenarios should be made with the best possible outcome for, again, our employees, our customers, our welfare as a business, it's going to help you make really objective decisions. And that's, again, you can have compassion and still make objective decisions. But again, I would really urge you to do as much scenario planning as you can before the scenario presents itself. So this was a good flow chart, and we will get this out to you as well. So the next part I wanted to share with you is, I'll fast forward a little bit to the end of this slide, that we have actually worked with our HR team, and they have been nice enough that we're actually going to be sending a PDF that has all the communication that we've been sending to our customers, and much of the communication that we've been sending internally as well. I feel like as much as we can not have to recreate the wheel, so to speak, and just take the best of what you think you can use and use that for your own, I think that'd be a good thing. Again, you don't have to use any of it, but if we can help you think through some things, we'd be happy to do that. I'd be the first to say that we're not perfect as well. We've obviously made some mistakes and reacted, but again, this is about making as many actions as you can. So the first one, as you remember, we sent out was an email about the potential outbreak and screener questions and travel implemented questions. So as you probably remember, I believe that was on March 4th, we sent a communication that, there were a lot of customers like, wow, I hadn't thought about that, but thank you. And, in hindsight, that was probably early in the game, and I'm really glad that we did. But again, we wanted to make sure that we were doing everything we can to not send out people that were in question. The second part is really for us, we have this shared resource folder that we're using of, all the different posters that we have, prevention information and financial resources, what we're doing. So we'll send as much of that to you as we can as well. The third part is just email addressing remote work and shared resources. So it's really easy to say, go work from home, everybody, except for the person that's never done it. And so, again, we scenario planned this with our group that said, hey, if we had to deploy this next week, this was early last week, let's test everything from bandwidth to logins and making sure that we do that. So there's some thinking there. And again, how do you actually email and communicate? It's easy to say, have staggered shifts and breaks. Not so easy when you're the person that's just running the production floor and they're probably responsible for kind of hitting some numbers, so to speak. So as much as we can work together of the best thinking, and so again, we've got several regions throughout the company, and we are trying to bring together the best thinking of what happens by branch. I don't think we have anyone that's got all the answers, but when we collectively are putting our thoughts together, we are definitely making some good decisions. And the last part is just addressing other workplace wellness practices. You know, again, if you think about this and say this is going to be a tough few weeks, what are the other things that we can do as an employer to help encourage the right behavior by our people, regardless of where this thing and how fast it ends? Again, how do we take the scenario, it's a tough one, and learn through this as much as we can? So how are we going to navigate this? Again, balancing our core business with human needs. I think this is a really important thing, and just be open with the fact that some of the things that we have to do, they're probably going to fight each other. It's hard to make tough decisions and run our business and do the right thing for our employees. But if you think about it, those are decisions we have to make every day. This is something today that everyone is watching. Everyone is watching the decisions that we as leaders are make, and everyone is going to compare how their other employer or their friends or their mom or their dad or their brother and sister. So again, I am taking the approach that everyone's watching and this is our time to shine. Scenario plan. I'm not sure if fun is the right word, but scenario plan, and like I mentioned before, do it without the names. Then scenario plan and put the names back in. Put the sensitive names back in and see if you make the same or similar decision. Don't strive for perfection. This is not a perfection game. This is about agility, and this is about making sure that we make the quickest decisions we can with the facts that we have at the time. But again, I think if you're waiting for perfection, we would have probably waited a week and a half to send our first email, but we knew with conviction that asking our employees those screener questions, no matter what happens, was a zero regrets move. And the last part is, we're all in business, right? So how are we going to make sure that as we do this, we find a way to differentiate as much as possible? So again, I think when you combine these four things, this is what we're doing. And I know that a lot of you folks are thinking about those same things as well. So some of the questions that we've received so far, and after this, again, you're going to receive an email that actually from our head of HR that has, or I'm sorry, it probably comes from marketing, but it's going to have a lot of the communication. The first one is, can we take the temperature of our employees before work? I think if you were to ask that question a week and a half ago, the answer is absolutely not. Are you kidding me? Like that's just unheard of. And literally as of the past probably hour and a half or so, our head of HR said that it looks like that is loosening up, so to speak, as preventative measures. So my answer on this one is I would not say carte blanche that you should go do that at all. If that's something that you're exploring, I would take a partner on that, so to speak. Yes, you're going to hear that some, maybe nursing homes are doing that, and there's some other places that absolutely have. So I can't say on this one, this is probably a legal question without knowing the intricacies of your business. Are there companies that are doing this and feel that they're within the legal right? Absolutely. Are there some that probably are doing it and aren't? I would probably say that as well. How's this outbreak impacting our current business from a client standpoint? So this is an interesting one. We know and we projected that we would have a lot of companies that were nervous about call-offs of their existing employees. We've definitely seen that. We've also seen companies that have precautionarily just kind of put some things on hold, and we've worked with them and reacted appropriately. And I think the third part is we've definitely had customers that have never called us before because they're panicking and they may not be users, so to speak, and now they're going, I'm probably going to need some folks. For us, as we evaluate our business, I think the first part is we know who our customers are, and we are looking to grow our relationship with our customers, our current customers, through this. We know that when you go through times like this, our great customers are there for us, and we're going to be there for them. regardless of whether they need more people or whether they're going to be pulling back in the temporary or in the short term. But yeah, there's also lots of folks that have reached out that, have never talked to us before. So we're seeing things as you'd expect on both ends of the continuum, for sure. Do we have more or less employees available now? I can't say that the quote-unquote unemployment number has gotten better through this, but intuitively, right? If you read the news, there are things that are happening out there where hospitality folks have been laid off, and I think that probably number is going to grow more than ever. We were just having this debate an hour or two ago. As you can tell, we have good debates in our company. It doesn't feel like the quote-unquote hospitality folks have jumped over yet. I don't know why. Maybe they're using this as a 3 or 4 day reprieve after working a ton of hours. But I do suspect that there could be, I'm going to say, some additional employees. We're not seeing that today. Again, I would reiterate, it feels like the population that we serve definitely realizes the gravity of this situation, though, and they're taking this seriously. Maybe that's a positive outcome of them realizing that employment isn't necessarily a right, it's a privilege. And so we're communicating often, and we are continually talking to our people to make sure that they understand what's going on. One of the things that we have seen a little bit is, I'll call it movement, so to speak, has been challenged. So we're trying to do everything right to make sure that we don't have in-person conversations as much as possible. And we're also trying to make sure that we keep as many of our current people at their current site. So working really hard to do that. Are we seeing daycare issues, and how are we dealing with that? Absolutely. I think that hits everybody. It's hitting me right now. And again, I think that there's some creative ways that some folks are dealing with that. Again, I probably can't give you advice that you should open up a daycare in one of your offices. Wouldn't be a bad idea, or it wouldn't be a good idea for me to give you that advice. But again, I think these are extreme times, and people are doing some creative things. Again, what we're trying to make sure that we do is we balance that maybe with some employees that are helping each other out. How do you balance that with kind of quote-unquote cross-contamination? So every decision right now has some unintended consequence that we are trying to make sure that we at least understand before we make a decision. Last question is, how are we handling rideshare? So as many of you know, we have a pretty unique offering in the market where we have rideshare. So we have vans that our employees actually take home with them, and they're kind of responsible to take other employees back and forth. It's been a great thing for our customers as well as our AEs. So this is just like an interesting example of some of the things that we've done that have been a little bit ahead of the curve. So as transportation is shutting down in some major metros, we're working as much as we can to say there are additional rideshare opportunities that we can work with our customers and our employees on. And I think the second part is the person that runs that for us. We talked late last week and said, let's get ahead of this thing. I want to make sure that we implement a cleaning schedule twice a day of what we're doing. And it's kind of funny, I'll leave the name of the company that we use out, but it's a national company. And we said to them, here's what we're going to be doing for our procedures. And this is a national rental car company. And they're like, we've never even thought of that. And so they're actually using our internal procedure right now for how to communicate that we are having a cleaning procedure for the vans that our employees are using as they go to your different sites. So again, hiccups in that system for sure if the driver needs to stay home with daycare issues. But yeah, we're trying to think of as many of those scenarios as we can. So as we kind of come to the close, and we'll reserve these next 10 minutes or so for some questions. So if you have questions, this is not the end. I know that there's going to be questions that we'll probably have beyond the call. We would love to partner with you. We will learn through this. So Janet Agnello, who's our head of human resources, also comes from a background of having a lot of experience in this space. So she has been a great asset to QPS in how we are navigating both in the decision making as well as the communication. So you can feel free to email her. I know that she's really busy right now, but our customers are really important. We can't provide legal advice, but I think there are some scenarios that we can maybe help you kick the tires on and also think through maybe some ideas that you haven't. But we'll be sending you this presentation after the call, as well as some of these charts that we used. And then also there's going to be a letter going out to all of our customers here this afternoon that are really now laying out, here's all the things that we are doing and the things that have changed, so to speak. And again, this is a fluid situation, and we know that in the days and weeks to come, there's probably going to be another regroup of what's changed and how are we acting upon that. So thank you for your time today. I really appreciate that. With that said, I'm going to see if we can take a few of these questions. Hold on one second. All right. First one is, what is QPS going to do if multiple people at the same employer are infected? You know, I think probably taking that to the conversation that we had earlier, you know, I think we're going to treat everything as a case-by-case basis. So if that were to happen, I'm literally going to pull out my protocol sheet. I'm going to be calling my head of HR, and we are going to be providing scenarios. The second part of that is we're going to be working with the employer to make sure that we have full transparency of what's going on. So I'm not the expert on what we would or wouldn't share, meaning we're going to share everything that we legally can. But I do believe in a scenario like that, we are going to share everything that we can, because there's this whole procedure that says, you know, do a count, so to speak, of who that person has interacted with, where they interacted with them, and is there a responsibility for us to make sure that we are taking any measures that we can to the next level. All right, what is your opinion on require employees who have traveled out of state to self-quarantine for 14 days? So I love that the person that asked this, they said, what is my opinion, not what is the government saying? So this one feels like it's a little bit outdated, and that's maybe a week old, so it's hard to say that, right? But I think there's only one state of the union, Vermont, as of yesterday, I'm going to say that wrong, that hasn't been infected. And it's hard for me to say that that is the right decision right now. Because, I mean, again, let me back up. In an abundance of caution, does that sound like the right thing for a person that's traveled out of state to quarantine for 14 days? Sure. Is that a practical solution and one that's the right one? It's hard for me to say that's the right thing to do. Now, that being said, I think asking a couple more probing questions, obviously someone that's been out of state, meaning Italy, Spain, Europe, for sure, any of the heavily infected areas. If someone just came from Seattle, I'd probably say not so good. So there's definitely hot spots, and again, this is changing by the day. But, you know, again, we're in Wisconsin. If someone was in Illinois yesterday, it's hard for me to say that's the litmus test of what would happen. All right, can you inform us on the stimulus and relief package, including paid sick and family leave? All right, so you guys are learning from me. I'm a pretty transparent guy. Looks like we're out of time. I'm just kidding. That is, so this one is really fast moving, and I'll tell you there's a couple of reasons for it. I know that it feels like it's almost done, and when you read through it, as lots of other employment laws, there's probably a lot of things that haven't been vetted yet. And as an example, I read something last night about Iowa. So we have a lot of customers in Iowa that the state is actually going to be picking up a lot of the things around unemployment and those types of things in Iowa. So what trumps the law, no pun intended, is it Iowa's state law? Is it federal? There's going to be guidance that comes from that. You know, when you look at the actual package, so to speak, there's lots of numbers in there, number of employees, there's some revenue things. And so I am going to kick the can by design on that one a little bit, because I'm probably a little premature on exactly what that means for us. There was also another question that came up on paid time. So we're going to be looking for the directive on that as well before we make a decision as an organization. It looks like regardless of what happens at the company level of what we think we're going to do, it feels like there's going to be some guidance or directive, so to speak, legally of what we're going to do. So look for us to kind of vet that and communicate effectively when we have more information. All right, you guys have some great questions here. All right, if I end up with an employee that tests positive, are you going to pull the employee I have here from you? So if we have a person that tests positive, you know, we obviously aren't going to have that person on working at your site. That's an immediate. I think, you know, there's lots of gray area between of they're presenting with symptoms, going to get tests. Definitely work with us on that scenario. Right now it's between a 1 and 3 day time frame to get those tests back. But, you know, easy answer on this one, or I should say easy, clear answer on this one. If I end up with an employee that tests positive, we will definitely make sure we pull that employee and work with that employee on as much as we can with you then on what things have to happen or should happen next. You know, again, I feel like we're going to be learning daily on this. And so what the right answer today is of what you do might change in the days and weeks to come. But again, we're going to do everything that we can to communicate and over-communicate with you. All right, I'm just looking to see if there's any other questions here. So one thing that I would love for you to think about is in the days and weeks to come, if there are unique situations that that are happening, whether they absolutely involve one of our folks or not, you know, again, I feel like in the spirit of us learning and us making sure that we work well together, we'd love to hear that. I'd love for you to send me a LinkedIn so that I can get to know some of you folks over LinkedIn. And also, again, make sure that we all navigate through this together as employers. With that said, thank you everyone for your time, and we will be in touch.